Welcome to History 112, Lecture 28, Limits of the New Deal. One of FDR's biggest problems during the first New Deal, and part of what frames his thinking for the second New Deal, is the Supreme Court. Now, once he's won re-election, FDR is going to see them as the biggest impediment to recovery. Now, of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court at the time, 3 are pro-New Deal, 4 are anti-New Deal, and 2 are swing votes to sit on the fence. Now, most decisions about court cases and challenges of the New Deal are going to come in as anti-New Deal on a 5-4 or 6-3 majority. So FDR proposes an overhaul of the federal courts. Now, because FDR has read the Constitution, he knows that there is no set number of justices. So, one of his proposals is to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court to 15. Now, the intent of increasing from 9 to 15 is that it will allow FDR to appoint enough New Deal justices in order to give FDR free hand to do what he wants. Now, opponents are going to criticize this as FDR grabbing power. Now, the whole argument about what to do with the Supreme Court kind of ends when the Supreme Court suddenly starts to consistently vote 5-4 in favor of the New Deal. Those 2 swing vote justices see it being more valuable to maintain the autonomy of the Supreme Court than necessarily the individual rulings. Now, also in the long run, as older justices retire, FDR is able to appoint more pro-New Deal justices, which also helps cement that swing in the court's opinion. FDR's other big challenge comes in the realm of economics. Now, just a quick review. FDR, like most people, does not understand complex economic theories, but he's president, and he's a very smart guy, and he relies on people who do. And many of these people are converts to Keynesian economics and the theories on deficit spending. What FDR understands is the free market in a pure form has failed. Hoover's do-nothing response had failed, massive government intervention is needed, and he has to be seen to do something to have a successful presidency. So, in his first term, this makes him willing to try new things. These new things, though, tend to be haphazard and sometimes fail, but on the whole, overall, the country is recovering. So, in 1937, FDR sees the country is clearly doing better. National income is nearly recovered. Many indicators show that the country has increasing industrial strength. We're at the point where we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We are looking forward to, the Depression is almost over. We're almost back to 1929 levels again. So FDR is then convinced by one of those important advisors that he has that he should balance the budget, because the man who's convincing him is a Treasury Secretary who is very much believed in traditional thinking on economic matters. So FDR is going to cut spending and dial back relief programs. And in a matter of months, 5.5 million people lose their jobs, and the economy crashes back down to the 1933 levels when he began. Now, FDR is forced then to ask Congress for a huge amount of spending in order to restart the economy. Now, 4 factors are combined to bring the New Deal to an end. First and foremost, a lot of people blamed FDR for the 1937 crisis. FDR had seen the country was nearly recovered and dialed back spending, not realizing that it was that spending that was maintaining the economy. By taking it away, it pulled the legs right out from the whole of the American economy and crashed it right back down. And this is a major disaster. At the same time, there are shifts in congressional elections that's making it much more difficult for FDR to get new programs approved and get Congress to back him. There's also an increasing concern, even with his own party, about the vast expansion of presidential power FDR has carried out during this great crisis. And importantly also, there's increasing concern about international events and the threat of another European war. While the New Deal only lasted a handful of years, there are some important legacies, such as the country becoming something of a broker state. Now, before the New Deal, many interest groups were very weak, but now they're able to advocate for themselves, and that was something the government actually encouraged during this time. There's a shift away from the economy being run for the exclusive benefit of bankers and industrialists, and the government's role is now to act as a mediator of varying interests. The legacy of the New Deal is a bit mixed for African Americans. This program is going to do very little to actually help them directly. FDR is, however, going to appoint many African Americans to second-level government positions, and these individuals are going to do their best to prevent New Deal programs from intentionally excluding African Americans. Now, New Deal programs are going to provide relief to African Americans, but they're going to do so in a way that tends to reinforce existing segregations. And that is because New Deal programs are often locally administered. Now, FDR's wife, Eleanor, is a major supporter of race equality, and she is a constant advocate, and FDR is willing to listen to her to a certain degree. But at the same time, FDR is not willing to alienate Southern whites, and at this time because he needs their support to get his programs through. Now, Southern blacks are going to recognize that FDR is doing more help for their community than any Republican candidate of that day would have. And this is where we see the beginning of an African American shift in voting patterns from being predominantly Republican to being predominantly Democratic. Now, for Native Americans, we first have to realize that before the Great Depression, these individuals already lived on the worst land, and government policy had been forced assimilation. But FDR is going to bring in the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, and that's going to get rid of the allotment policy, and it's going to restore tribal government, and it's going to provide some tools for rebuilding viable tribes. And for example, one of the key things that happens because of FDR's efforts is that farm income for Native American increases 2,000% in the decade following the act. Now, with regards to women, FDR is more open than women's rights than past presidents have been. And FDR supported appointing women to key government offices, and he is going to be the first president to appoint a female cabinet member. However, the women he appoints tend to favor protective legislation over workplace rights, and as a result, New Deal programs tend to reinforce the idea of women staying in the home. Social Security is going to provide some payments for women who are going to stay at home to care for children also. And New Deal relief work was generally only open to women who were widowed or whose husbands had abandoned them. So while FDR is bringing more women into the conversation, the women he's listening to are advocating staying to a more traditional role. So there's an expansion, but at the same time, there's a retrenchment in terms of how gender roles are treated by the government. It's important to note that the New Deal has some significant failures. The New Deal, if anything, reinforced the prevailing opinion that women should stay at home while men worked, and many felt women should give up their jobs and let men have them because the prevailing belief was that men were wage earners and women were homemakers. And the New Deal is going to very strongly reinforce that. Now, one of the other big failures is the New Deal programs tend to accept local prejudice and will not challenge Jim Crow laws in the South. Now, depending on your political point of view, this could be regarded as a failure or as a victory, is that the New Deal establishes the welfare state. From a conservative point of view today, this is a major failing, is a major victory from a liberal point of view. This is the point at which the government becomes responsible for how people live and to ensure a quality of life. Whether that's a success or a failure is going to kind of depend on your political leaning. Now, importantly, and the biggest failure of the entire New Deal is it does not achieve recovery. The government threw huge amounts of money at this great economic problem and managed to make it livable, which was a huge step up from what Hoover had done. But by no means does FDR solve it. Now, for the South and the West, we do have to realize that these two regions are going to receive more assistance than the rest of the country. And for the West, it's going to economically transform the region, and it's going to engage in widespread infrastructure development. And the New Deal agencies and their successors are going to maintain a much larger presence in the West after the end of the Great Depression. And we do have to realize this. These are the states which are very recently settled or recently formed, and these are the states where there hasn't been a lot of long-term development. So it's those federal dollars that are really going to bring those states forward really fast. Now, in the South, this is not going to challenge racism. Projects are going to be locally administered. And the New Deal is also going to reinforce the existing perception of the South as being backwards, although it's going to do so unintentionally. So what's the big idea here? Well, the New Deal has positives and its negatives. It is going to tend to not address certain social issues, and it's going to do so on the excuse that they're looking at the greater good. For example, they're not going to challenge Jim Crow in the South because FDR feels he's dependent on those Southern votes. So it becomes the greater good, lesser of several evils argument, and that is often how it's perceived at the time. Now, this is going to have a lasting impact on the country and on minorities, and a lot of minorities are going to see that they are not getting fair treatment under the New Deal, but at the same time, they're going to look at FDR's treatment of them as being better than the alternative, so they're going to be also making the same type of lesser of two evils arguments in response. See you in the next lecture.